So, welcome to the Libri et Ludos podcast, which is Latin for books and games. We decided on a fancier name than books and games just by making it Latin. So today we are... to introduce the podcast, we're going to be discussing books and games, one of each that we both read or played, and the other one will be one that either one or the other hasn't played or read. So why don't you tell us what we're talking about today?
Well, first of all, we should probably introduce our names. I'm Reed.
Andrew.
There we go. So basically the format, we'll be discussing, like you said, a couple games, a couple books. Games can be board game or video game related, no matter, whatever fits the theme of the week. I think this time we're talking about dystopian narratives.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be a real, cheerful, uplifting video. So stay tuned.
Depending
for that.
on which one we're talking about, I think some are a little bit less bleak than others. But yeah, that is definitely a that aspect to it. There's also so we're also doing like novels or short stories, depending. And one thing we do want to mention is that we will be getting into depth, so there will be spoilers. So.
Yes.
Spoilers.
So don't get angry if you continue listening to this video or watching the video or listening to the podcast and all of a sudden you're getting ruined for these. If I get angry emails, you know what? You're going to get a real talking to. You've been forewarned. But anyways, going to, I guess, highlighting the books that will be, well, first, I'll mention the games that we're going to be talking about. To kind of fit the theme, we're going to be taking a look at Bioshock, which is a classic game. It came out quite a while ago, but it is the Bioshock series as a whole really nicely ties into this, as we'll talk about later. And the other game, which is a game that Andrew has not played, however I have had a chance to play, is Detroit. Become Human, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a little bit. What about the books?
So the books are right here. We've got The Windup Girl, which was actually a selection for our book club for Meant Fiction, selected by Colin Hayes. Excuse me. And that one's a bit of a near future climate change, genetic engineering nightmare. And this one is Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. That was written that's a Philip K. Dick novel. This one, The Windup Girl's Paolo Bacigalupi, and Philip K. Dick wrote Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. It was published in 1974, and that was like a near future back then, so there's a lot of anachronisms, but yeah, talking about the future when it was written in the past. Anyways, so Reed, why don't you start off with a discussion of... Well, why don't we start off with a discussion of Bioshock, because we both played it. I mean, I love the game, yeah.
Yeah, we can. First, I just kind of want to say I'm glad that you were the one that picked up on the name, because I'm not pronouncing his last name, because I'll butcher it.
I went onto YouTube to double check, and it is Italian, and it is Bacigalupi. I listened to it on YouTube, so I feel pretty...
You practiced
my
quite
research.
a bit before. Oh, this is good. At least one of us is prepared. So Bioshock is a game that I think you played it before I did back in the day. That's how I was introduced to it. You had picked it up, and I came over to your house, and we played through it, but then I picked it up a few years later and played through it. Bioshock is a series of games. There's 3 in the series. 2 of which take place in the same world. The other one is kind of, some would argue that's an offshoot. It's kind of its own thing. But the original Bioshock is basically takes place in a dystopian alternate 1960s, where there is a group of people that have basically left the regular countries of America and places like that, to found their own, I guess, society outside of the rules of the government and all that kind of stuff. And so they build this whole city, I guess, underneath the ocean. And they come across a lot of discoveries. It's basically businessmen and scientists who kind of, and like all the most intelligent and high elite of the societies kind of leave and create the society.
It was Randian, like Ayn Rand's version of like objective. Like it was very much like a, let the best win, fuck everyone else type of thing.
Yeah, for sure. That kind of comes up within the game itself. A lot of those things, and the Atlas shrugs and all that kind of stuff. One of the characters being named Atlas, which is kind of on the nose.
Yeah.
But it was a game that came out that was really, I guess, when it came out, it won a lot of awards, and it was proclaimed by a lot of people to be like the beginning of video games as a medium of art, even though I would argue that there were definitely video games before that came out that would be considered an art form as well. But the storytelling and the character development and the twists and turns and the arguments that they make within the game made it quite a compelling story, and it was beloved by a lot of people. It became very famous. There was even talks of a movie at points that kind of fell through.
Yeah, I don't think that's really all that uncommon for video games, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean,
blockbuster video games, anyways.
Absolutely, but kind of different in the sense that like this one would have been a legitimate game, I think, or a legitimate movie instead of your Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, I mean it was very much like like the way the game actually played out was like you would find these audio recordings of like these different characters, like because you were kind of came in after this underwater city where so a lot of it was about genetic manipulation, and they basically were using these things called plasmids, which were. So they found these sea snails that they would harvest these, like they could use to harvest these psychic powers, essentially.
Yeah, basically they produced these plasmids that would allow people to gain all these different crazy powers. A variety of things, telekinesis, all this other kind of stuff.
Setting stuff on fire with their mind.
Yes,
all that kind of
shooting bees.
Yeah. Bees, yeah.
Really some ridiculous, but also really interesting things. And so a lot of people hailed it, and scientists obviously saw it as like the next step in evolution and all this kind of stuff, and it was a way to improve on the human body itself, and so that humanity could take the next step. The problem was, of course, is that there was a high demand for it, and the plasmids themselves were really hard to harvest, so they found that the sea slugs I think died very easily, or there was something like that. They were very sensitive.
To create them, they could basically get these things. They needed to inoculate or to infect these little girls with these sea slugs, and then to actually harvest them, to actually get the powers, you would have to kill the little girl. And so there was like, this was like the moral dilemma of the story was like, you come across these little girls and they'd be protected by these massive protectors called the Big Daddies, which were like these guys with these massive drills on their arms. Anyways, like big fight, like you fight these guys and like you eventually kill them after like a pretty pitched battle, and then you make the choice: do you harvest the little girl, or do you let her go?
You're given the options, the moral choice of whether you save the girl or whether you harvest her for the sluggo juices inside.
Yeah, essentially.
But getting back to the main point of the story was that there was this crisis, because what ended up happening, even though a lot of people had these powers and it was the elite that were kind of living this society, there was still that divide. There came to be a divide where there's the working class versus the elites. The elites kind of just like had all the money, had all that, and the working class were working their asses off to make sure that this whole city called Rapture would continue to function. So, and then there was that the age-old story of the lower class like rising up and fighting against the elites and trying to overthrow them, and of course that threw the whole place into civil war and causing all sorts of aftermath. Chaos to ensue, and because both sides had these people that were hopped up on plasmids and could do all sorts of crazy powers. So when you come into it, it's the aftermath of that. The Civil War has already happened. The place is in ruins in a lot of places.
Crazy too. That was another thing.
Well, it was causing insanity in a lot of people. So it was that balance of, well, yeah, we're getting all these crazy powers, but we're also half nuts and want to go around murdering little girls and anybody that we come into contact with. So it's very much I guess a horror game at the time, but it was very interesting because it brought up a lot of moral dilemmas and moral issues and things that were very common.
Social commentaries. Yeah, it was well done, and it was very. It was a fun game. The game itself was very. It was almost like a first-person shooter. It was very much like, but it was it was leveling up mixed into it. And this was back in the days when not every single game had leveling up in the mix. So. Yeah, it was good, and it was again this. So that genetic manipulation. That's kind of one of the reasons we chose it, because that ties into the Windup Girl.
Yes,
which
definitely.
I suppose we could talk about that now.
Sure.
So the Windup Girl is a book. It was written about 10 years ago, and the story kind of is near future, where all these. Basically, what has happened is the Monsantos of the world have kind of taken over, and they've created all these plants to feed everybody, and they've basically decimated all the natural born vegetation with all these created plant diseases, and basically forcing people to buy their seeds or whatever to grow. And then there were all kinds of disasters where they things went awry and mutated, and entire countries were devastated with starvation.
Yeah, and a lot of the companies started kind of having industrial warfare against each other, where they would create all these viruses and plagues that would end up infecting the competitors' plants and stock. And so they released all these genetically enhanced insects and stuff that would actually destroy other people's crops, so that their crops would be resistant to it. Of course, the problem is that, as Jeff Goldblum always says, nature finds a way, and so everything just kind of went to shit because it got out of control, and it got to the point where there was all of our plant life that we normally would have, like fruits and vegetables and all that stuff, pretty well ceased to exist. It was all eliminated, and as you said, whole countries foundered completely, and there was lots of chaos. And basically, these companies became the new powers. They kind of gained all the power because they were the only ones that had the seeds that they could plant. However, the problem was that the seeds were all they weren't, or they were sterile, so they were only good for one harvesting season, and then they had to buy new seeds. So it was really the companies themselves were really horrific in the sense that they were the mustache twirling bad guys in this sense. It's it's all about the money. Yeah. We don't care about any human loss, which is kind of ridiculous considering that they have to eat as well, but they were completely okay with it.
Yeah, it was it was very this was set in Thailand, which was the one last holdout of they had their own seed bank, and it's very much their methods are they have this environment ministry, which are called the White Shirts, and their methods are extreme, to say the least, to try to keep any kind of genetically manipulated stuff out of the
the whole country just basically walled themselves off so that nobody was allowed. Foreigners are very rarely let in, and even they're only let in to a certain degree. They're not they aren't given a lot of control, and they're only allowed to go to certain districts because they don't want them fucking everything up for them. Which, to be fair, is a legitimate complaint in this world, considering the fact that we have been told through the book, we find out that there's other countries that completely got ruined and were annihilated, and millions and millions of people died because of these countries, or these companies that literally moved in and just basically took over. Yeah. So their fears are genuine. But a lot of their actions that this environment ministry does are very extreme.
And they're like, and there's corruption. They're like taking
Yeah.
bribes and shit.
Well,
And like there's like that's like a huge part. Is like, you know, like the bribes are such that these companies, they can still get through. And this whole story is basically about the fall like this, the fall of the city, and you know the city in Thailand.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and it's also about the Windup girls. So they're not just genetically manipulating plants. Like, these wind-ups are genetically manipulated human beings. And
So that's kind of the big thing, is that this wind-up is, she's almost in the background. She's not like the main focus of the story for a lot of it until, you know, about halfway through the book.
Yeah.
And she causes a lot of problems in the story, and she causes a lot of the plot lines that happen. It's because of her. But the thing about her is that she is genetically enhanced.
So
human being.
Sorry to interrupt, but one of the interesting things about the, like, why she's called the Wind-Up Girl is, like, they had these cats were like kind of like her predecessor. They're called the Cheshire Cats, and they were created on a whim by a bunch of rich folk to like have like an exotic pet, and it was like this
based off of Alice in Wonderland, the Cheshire Cat.
Yeah.
So it could basically, he wanted to give it to his like 9-year-old daughter as a gift, and so he created this cat that could blend into its surroundings, and all you would see is its eyes and its face, I guess. Of course, then everybody at the party, all the kids wanted one, so all the other family members were like, "Oh shit! Like, let's make some more for all these kids." And of course, they all flew back to their own countries, and these Cheshire Cats got loose, started
mated with regular
cats, and their gene was dominant over the regular cats. So regular cats ceased to exist, and these Cheshires just took over, and they became a real nuisance, because the problem was that a lot of them escaped and were living out in the real world, or out in nature and stuff, and they eliminated all the songbird population, because the fact was that the birds couldn't. It was a super predator, basically. Yeah. They couldn't handle it, because they didn't even know that these damn cats were up on them before they ate them. Yeah. The songbirds don't exist anymore. There's all these things in the world that they just kind of mention. It's like, yeah, man, I haven't heard a bird song in like 10 generations. It's like, what the? Like, it's insane how much, it throws everything off. But it's very reminiscent of early colonists bringing certain animals to a country, and it ends up decimating, parts of the ecosystem, right? Like, very much like the cane toads in Australia and stuff like that.
And
right?
so this is
problem.
The wind-up was kind of like this thing that they built into these genetically modified humans, which were quote unquote better. Like, they had better hearing, better vision, better, like, all their senses were enhanced. They were faster, and they put these stutter stop motions is how they would move around, so that people could recognize them. And they actually, like, the slang word for them is hichi kichi in the story, and it's like this, like, they're like hated by the regular population because they are this genetically modified thing. And like the white shirts, like, if they knew, she's like, so this Wind-Up Girl's living in Thailand. They're created in Japan, and like living in Thailand in this like very like, it's like, how did she survive so long? But it's because like, like she's being it's like a black market human being, essentially, like, because she's in this like horrific conditions in this like sex club, like getting
she's a prostitute when we meet her, but a
slave, like, she's not like, it's a sex slave type of situation. She doesn't really have any control over it. The thing to keep in mind is that these wind-ups were created to basically replace a lot of the workforce in a lot of menial jobs and things like that, but they were also created, the Japanese created them a lot of them because they had a real crisis of a low birth rate. And so they created these. Again, has an air of reality. Because
it's a real issue over in Japan. So they created these things basically as companions and stuff for a lot of people. And that's what she was in the beginning. She was a companion to an ambassador from Japan over in Thailand until he had to leave, and because it cost too much to bring her back to Japan, he just bailed on her and he just left her there. Right? Disregarded her, and she was left on her own. Of course, then she was picked up by this pimp, basically, who runs a strip club / brothel, and so she works there, and that's when we meet her.
Yeah.
And she is degraded quite a bit because a lot of the other prostitutes, especially one in particular, she absolutely hates her and treats her like an animal, even worse than an animal, really, and makes her do all these very degrading things. It's really shocking, actually. This is probably the one thing about the book that I'll say, like, most of the book is actually pretty tame, except for those scenes.
Well, I mean, there's some serious violence scenes, but there's like extreme like sexual violence.
It's pretty graphic, and it's pretty like shocking compared to the rest of it. Because like most people are pretty used to violence and stuff like that. But that
gotta love our culture.
Oh yeah, it's kind of what we're known for now. But like that whole thing is still very shocking because it was just out of left field, right? Up until that point, everything was pretty calm. Yeah, there was a couple of guys that got trampled to death by an elephant or something, but like it was all just very like abrupt, and it's like whatever. This went into severe
stark.
detail.
It was very stark and contrast. Yeah,
but I think it just kind of helped us kind of see the shitty existence that she was in.
Yeah.
And compared to a lot of other people, and a lot of other people were in equally horrible conditions, but she was just she was made to do a lot of stuff that was just, it was very uncomfortable to read, but it was good because it really solidified your empathy for this girl.
Yeah.
But the big thing about the wind-ups is that they're exactly like humans except for this jerky motion, and in a lot of ways they are better than us, except if they have been given certain flaws on purpose in their genetic code. Like, for instance, Amiko, who is the wind-up girl, like, her skin is ridiculously smooth because they genetically changed her DNA so that her pores were ridiculously small, to the point where her living in hot conditions, which Thailand is a little bit infamous for, she constantly needs cold water because she can't, to cool herself down. Yeah. Otherwise, she'll overheat and die because she can't sweat.
Yeah, she runs around like a fair bit. Like, she'll like die. Like, there's several points where she nearly dies from like overheating. Yeah. But I mean, like there's so many different facets to this. Like, there's a very interesting character who was like part of the environment ministry, and like her relationship. Like, so her boss dies at one point, and he's like this super macho, super macho hero guy, and then she's like. Very much like believes in this dogmatic interpretation of Buddhism, and like it's very much, she's like kind of like, oh, it's all karma, I can't do anything, and like there's like a very much like a spiritual element to it, and that was a very interesting point, because she does kind of break free of it at the last moment, and it's like there's like some renewal and rejuvenation on its way as a result of it. Yeah,
there's a little bit of hope, and I think a lot of the characters experience. Most of the main characters in that book experience that little bit of freedom at the end, where they kind of break free of their traditional, what they were in, like the place that they were in. Because you have a character who, like, is the first character that we're introduced to, and it's from his perspective, is a calorie man, and he's basically this spy that has been sent in by the companies to try and find the seed bank and try and steal secrets, or try and get them back so that they can use them, or try and get access to the seed bank. And through that, he finds there's all these other plot lines that happen where he finds that there's a geneticist that's obviously working for them that everybody thought was dead, and he's still alive. And he's doing this. He's creating all these new fruits that are impervious to all the plagues and stuff for Thailand exclusively. So he wants access to him and all this kind of stuff. But he's a scumbag. He's a horrible human being throughout the whole book, except for the fact that he does, when it comes to, he falls in love with the wind-up girl. He falls in love with Amiko, and that is his freedom. That is his last thing that he does before he ends up, dying, ironically, of a plague.
But it's like, apparently it's something like, it's a bacterial infection that could have been solved with penicillin.
Either way, it doesn't matter. He dies of a plague is all you need to know. Yeah. And the thing is that he makes deals with other shady characters to make sure that she's going to be left alone, that she's going to be okay, because when he's gone, when he's dead, they could very well just murder her. but he wanted to make sure she was protected, and so that's what he does, and it's one redeeming factor that he does. And there's other characters who do the same thing.
Well, most of them, with aside from a couple of that don't ever redeem themselves, there is like a lot of redemption in this story.
Yeah.
Which I thought was great, especially considering the, again, dystopian fiction. Normally, it's pretty.
Yeah, it's pretty lousy, pretty sad times, but
there
for
was
everybody
hope at the end, which was great.
Yeah. Which was great. And the interesting thing about the Windup girl. And the wind-ups themselves, they're kind of given this programming. There's a point where they mention that they've injected Labrador genes, like the dog, into the wind-ups to make them more obedient and make them more servile.
Yeah.
And there's several occasions where they point that out, and she even acknowledges that fact, because even when she knows what she's doing or like what somebody's doing to her, especially like the sexual situations, she knows is degrading and she absolutely hates it. There's a small part of her is getting pleasure out of it because of the fact that she knows that she's making somebody else happy, which is really, really twisted. But it really plays into that whole thing of like, my God, these people have been like, and they're human beings, they're test tube babies basically, but like,
and they're sterile too.
They're sterile, yes. They made them sterile because obviously you don't want the
Cheshires kind of like
these, they don't want them reproducing, and they don't want them because they would basically take over and eliminate, I guess, or the human race would cease to exist as we know it, and these wind-ups would be the next. I guess evolution, and a lot of people are terrified of that.
That's kind of hinted at the end, which I kind of like thought was like it was like a very interesting, because I mean, to some degree, like our own evolution from a physiological perspective has come to largely to a slowdown, if not like it probably hasn't halted, but like people are surviving stuff that normally would have killed us in the wild. So to whatever degree the natural selection used to change our, like to change the way that we are actually moving, like in terms of like a species, like that has really slowed down. So this was kind of like a human beings interfere to some degree, and then you create this thing that's more like if all the human beings had that degree of servility in them, and like basically were more like
open
like
to making sure that everybody else is happy,
then that might be something that ensures that the world survives, rather than all this like this horrific capitalistic greed that kind of wrecked it in the first place in the book. So
it definitely rings that kind of tone, and like they make hints that there are like these communes or these little places of Eden where the wind-ups who no longer have a master or anything, have just kind of disappeared and live in the wild and just kind of do their own thing, which is interesting. Whether it actually exists or not, we never find out, and it's left up to interpretation whether it ever existed in the beginning, first or last. But it's one of those things where I think a lot of the character, Amiko, especially the wind-up, she pretty well comes to terms that like it doesn't matter, because her whole goal for a lot of it is, I want to leave and stop being mistreated like this, and actually find this commune and live there, and so I can live in peace. But towards the end, she really realized that I don't even want that anymore. I just want to be myself, because I don't think I'd be happy there either. And she does make a life for herself, or she makes at least she is free in the sense that she's able to do what she wants at the end, which is really great to see. And throughout the whole book, she's really the only innocent character out of all of them. So you're really rooting for her and making sure and hoping to God that she's like, out of everybody, that she's the one that gets what she wants at the end of it. And she does. She very explicitly gets exactly what she wants, which is fantastic. The other characters, you still root for some of them, even though they're pieces of garbage.
They're multifaceted.
Absolutely, they're human beings, right?
They're things, but
they have their redeeming qualities. They're still likable in some facets, even though some of them do some really nasty stuff, and they acknowledge that they're doing some really terrible things, but they don't care. Or they do care. Some of them care. Some of them don't. Much like anybody in real life that you encounter. But speaking of servile automatons, I guess we can get into Detroit and Become Human.
But highly recommend it. Just want to make a point. Highly recommend the Windup Girl. Check it out.
Terrible book.
Yeah.
Awful.
Yeah.
No, it was really good. Become Human, Detroit. Now this is a game that I played.
I haven't.
You haven't played it.
No.
Have you seen anything about it, or
I think I might have seen one or two screenshots.
Okay.
Some bald-headed dude.
Right. Yeah. Well, he's on the front cover of the game itself. So yeah, that's probably you would have seen that. So Detroit Become Human takes place again, dystopian future, near future, where we are in the city of Detroit, and basically we're in a state where the United States, or in the world itself, there were these major breakthroughs with AI technology, and so they've created these androids. And now these androids, there's these massive advancements in androids, and in Detroit, that's where they have the factories that are producing all of these androids, and that's where the company is based. So it's bringing in a lot of money to Detroit. So there's a lot of new fancy buildings. It looks really crazy and technologically advanced and all this kind of stuff. And so these androids have been produced, and in America they're used pretty well all throughout, and especially in Detroit. And the thing is that the androids look very similar to humans. They even have like an exterior skin that makes them look exactly like regular humans. The only thing that tells them apart from regular humans is that they have these two little circles on either side of their head that glow, just to show them, I guess, like processing, almost like a computer. Thing is apparently you find out later that you can actually remove those, so then it's very difficult to tell them apart. But what happens is that these androids obviously have been introduced into society as servants and as replacements for a lot of different jobs. So they're taxi drivers, they work at amusement parks, they're people's assistants, they're caretakers. They work in all facets of life, especially all the menial positions. Problem with that is, of course, is that the people that used to work in those positions are now out of jobs. So even though Detroit is like flourishing and has all this money coming into it and it looks really nice, there's this element of unemployment. I think the unemployment rate is something like 40% in the city. And it's just caused a lot of strife, so there's a lot of...
They took our gerbs,
and there's a lot of people that are really upset about this, obviously, because they're unemployed, and a lot of people are kind of without purpose, right? Much like, I guess, present-day Detroit, with when a lot of the car companies started closing up, or started closing their factories. A lot of people would have that same sort of, well, I've worked there for the last 20 years, what the hell am I supposed to do now? Yeah. Right? They lose their focus and they lose their purpose in life.
Well, this is one of the classic worries about AI.
Exactly.
If we don't shift the way we operate, then exactly.
So the game takes place, and what's from the perspective of 3 different characters, and you control those characters. And throughout the game, you mechanically wise, you make all sorts of decisions, and you can interact with the world in so many different ways, and based on what you choose to do and the decisions that you make, it alters the storyline and for the entire world, right? Or at least for the city of Detroit and the plot that takes place within it. But basically it boils down to some of the androids, they're mistreated by a lot of people, and they're considered just like you would treat a computer, a car, or anything like that. If it works, you're just kind of, you ignore, like a lot of people just ignore that they're even there, except until they don't work, or until they just malfunction, or end up getting in your way. So then, you have these instances where, one of the android characters bumps into another human being, and that a human being fucking goes nuts and lays into him. It's like, you stupid piece of shit, and you dumb machine, like, what are you doing? And and it's very much like any human being, and it's very shocking in the sense that these people, like these androids, look exactly like human beings. So it's like, man, you're literally beating on another human being. But from their perspective, these things are machines. From a lot of people's perspective and their opinions, these are machines. They're just like, if your phone starts slowing down, well, you start cursing on it, or the computer is not working, or it gets a virus or something. Well, now or if the car breaks down and you're late for your appointment, well, you start kicking the car because you start cursing on it. So you have those people that are treating it like that. You also have people that sympathize with the androids. And so the androids, you control these 3 androids, and they all are from different walks of life. There's one who's a caretaker for this elderly artist, and he's super rich, and so he's like his caretaker. There's a woman android, a female android, who basically is a maid who works for the single father and his daughter, and lives in their home. And then there's a detective, or an android who is a detective or is assisting the police in all sorts of different crimes, especially when they're related to androids. So what's happening in the world is that there are a few androids that are going a bit haywire and becoming what they call deviant. So they're operating outside of their parameters, outside of their programming, and start going off the edge. Some of them end up hurting or killing their owners, or hurting other people. And so
sounds like Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yeah, or even iRobot, or any of those, right? So like this investigator android is sent in by the company to assist the police in trying to find out the source of this deviancy and what's going on. And so when you're playing his chapters, you go through it and you're investigating crime scenes and all this kind of stuff. The caretaker, who is to the rich old man, he ends up kind of going through a major change, because through the jigs and the reels, what ends up happening is that he loses, his caretaker dies, and he's blamed, his caretaker ends up having a heart attack, and he's blamed for its death, as if he attacked it. And so the police end up shooting him, and he gets dumped into this garbage landfill, where he kind of fixes himself, and he ends up finding all these other androids who are also deviant and break out of their programming, and he starts to become their leader, and they're hiding out from everybody because they know if they get caught by the police or anybody like that, they haven't done anything wrong. They're just operating on their own consciousness now, outside of their programming, and they feel like they're more than just robots. And so they're kind of living in their own commune, but they start fighting for their rights and stuff like that. And so there's that little civil rights kind of thing going on. And
sounds like tones of slavery and
it gets into it, and
Nazi Germany, that kind of thing.
It's interesting because some of that it's very blatant as it goes on, that it's very much akin to the slave movement, especially in the United States, underground to Canada, all that kind of stuff. There's the Underground Railroad type thing going on, and they start fighting for their rights for freedom and all this kind of stuff, or to choose to be free and to have their own rights as androids. And of course that doesn't go well with a lot of society, so there's violence, and you have the choices that you make either lead to a peaceful resolution or a violent upheaval, and the androids all die kind of thing. And then the woman who is I guess a maid. She ends up kind of protecting this little girl. The father, you find out, is very abusive, and so she kind of goes deviant and takes the girl and runs away from this abusive father. And so they're on the run, and of course the police just think, well, she's kidnapped this little girl, but really she's saving her from her abusive father and all this kind of stuff. And then so it's about her journey of trying to get away from Detroit and trying to get to Canada. That's their goal, is to get to Canada, because there's no laws there that it's a very gray area, and androids aren't really used in Canada, so it's like, oh, well, if we get there, we can kind of just hide out and nobody will bother us, right? So that's their whole goal, but then they get caught up with everything else that's going on. So, it's very similar themes. There's this the dystopian narrative is there because you got a lot of people who are unemployed who hate the androids, like outwardly hate the androids, but then you have a lot of the population who just like, they're just tools, right?
Yeah.
Like anything else. But then you have the sympathizers as well, the people who feel like, you know what, they are something more. And you realize that some of the androids have been designed to be partners for people. Some people have literally bought these androids so that they're their life partners, right? And they're lovers and things like that, but they're programmed to love, right? It's not. And so some of these break out and kind of want to be free as well. And so there's that whole argument of, well, should they be allowed to be free? Are they just tools, or have they become human, as the game so cleverly puts in the title? It's a good game. The storyline is, I mean, it's kind of your generic science fiction. Like, yes, it follows pretty well the most predictable paths in some regards. There's some little twists in there that are really cool too, especially depending on your choice. What I really liked about the game was that the characters, based on your decisions, all your characters could die, and like whole narratives could be completely wiped out because you made a wrong decision. And so in one character, so every playthrough is a little bit different.
It reminds me of Until Dawn, which was great.
Yeah, it's very similar to that, and like the cinematics in it are really nice too, because it takes on that same aspect. They're real actors that they've had to play these people, and it looks very nice. It's a very beautiful game, but yeah, and it gets into some really morally horrible areas and some gray areas as well, right? You know, because you're playing these different characters in different chapters, some of them are literally, their values completely go counter to the values of another character. So you're kind of rooting for all of them, but at the same time, you know, because the detective android wants to stop all the deviants. However, you have the choice, depending on his choices that he makes throughout the game, to become deviant himself and kind of join up. But he could end up being, you know, throughout most of it, he's pursuing these other two deviants, right? And so you're like, oh shit, I don't want you to catch these other two characters that I also play. So you're kind of thrown into this thing, and it also thrusts you into this idea, like especially with Kara, the female android. Her chapters are they get kind of heavy, a little bit like Windup Girl. She's thrust into a lot of awful positions as well, and throughout most of it, I think what I liked most about the game is that they actually made a compelling child character that you actually cared about. A lot of times in video games, they're kind of infamous for making a child character that they're just more annoying than anything. But this character you actually really felt for.
Sounds a bit like Last of Us. That was
Last of Us was very much like that, and the first season of Walking Dead, where you have this child character that you actually care about. You don't want to be a jerk to, and you want to be nice to, and make sure that and tell them that everything's going to be okay. Walking Dead did that to me as well. Normally, when I have those games where you choose your own adventure, I tend to choose like the asshole path and just being a downright masochist and just being awful to people. I don't know what that says about me, but it's just something that I find, it's just enjoyable just to see like the reactions, and it's like, oh, I'm just going to choose the jerk option and be a dickhead to people.
Chaotic evil.
Yeah, but with this game, it made me want to choose the good options. I felt compelled. I was like, I don't want to see these characters be dicks. I don't want to see them get hurt.
And
right?
that's interesting to me, because like that's like kind of like one of the criticisms that have been leveled against video games is this idea that there's like no, like, is it really art? Is there any kind of a something, I suppose, that speaks to your soul in any kind of real way? You know what I mean?
I think it does for sure. But there's a lot of people who would say, you know, it doesn't, right? And it's not.
I don't think it's.
No, I mean, Gene Siskel was,
Ebert.
Ebert
is
Ebert
like
was
classic
the one
for one, not for saying that, which I think
that.
was just like a generational thing, and he didn't really know what he was getting on with. To me, perfectly fair.
I think there was a lot of that. Although I think he did come around at the end, and he did kind of mention there was like one game that he really liked, and he thought, oh, this is really good. Yeah. I don't know. I could be wrong there, but it's one of those games that really. it plays like a movie. You
Yeah.
could definitely sit down and just watch it and probably really enjoy it.
Yeah. Watch a YouTube streamer or something.
Yeah, or just watch a playthrough of it, or just sit in the living room and watch somebody else play it. I think it would be really enjoyable to watch. It's one of those games, and that's not something that everybody can kind of tolerate, but I think this is one of the games that has kind of excludes this game.
Yeah.
The choose your own adventure aspect is really fun too, and very similar to Bioshock as well, right? There is that element of like, oh, you can kind of choose to be a good guy or choose to be horrible, or a mix of both.
Yeah.
But it really ties into the Windup Girl, like the idea that these androids are treated very similar to the Windup Girl or the Windups, in the sense that they are
Less than
Less
persona
than.
non grata.
yeah, and they're treated as such, even though that realistically they're very, very similar.
Quote unquote better, you know.
Yeah, or better,
Yeah.
in that sense. And I think Windup Girl, especially more so than in Detroit, because the Windups are literally humans. Like at the end of the day, the androids are still robots, right?
Yeah.
Like they are all machine. However, they still they have their desires, their needs for things, and their wants. And it's interesting, the couple of little plot twists that happen throughout the game, are some, you could say that they might be predictable for some people. I didn't predict it, but they did call into question a lot of things, because then it made you as a player kind of change your opinions about certain things as well.
Yeah.
And you were always able to go back and reflect on all the decisions you made, and you could see all the different paths that you could take, and if you chose this decision, this whole tree would have gone this way. Now, it doesn't tell you exactly what would have happened, but then it gives you that replayability. It's like, oh shit, I want to go back and play this chapter again and see if I chose this, where's the story branch? And you can see some of the choices I made like ended the chapter very quickly, and then you go back and review it and it goes all the way, like, and I'm like, oh my god, there was so much more to that chapter that I completely missed out on because of my choices. It's very akin to, real life.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And the choices that you make, completely change the narrative of your day or
Reminds me
of
of
what
that,
you're doing.
that movie Run Lola Run.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
similar to that.
Okay, well, I think to get rolling on the book now. The
Tell us about Philip K. Dick's.
Flow My Tears, the Policeman said. So this was another piece of dystopian fiction. Like, that's Philip K. Dick's thing, is like he wrote Blade Runner, and
seems to like that.
yeah, that's pretty much everything I've read by him has been dystopian to some degree.
And I love Blade Runner, so this is...
So this was a very interesting one. This was like kind of a so the main character is this so it's near future, 1988, and it was written in 74. Near future, the main character his name's Jason Taverner. He's like this he's a talk show host, essentially. He's also a singer, and he's like loved by millions of people. Like, he's like well known, and he's like kind of like living in this bubble at the top of society. And it's kind of hinted at throughout that basically Nixon's policies won, and he's like, he died at some point, and there's like a fresco of him like ascending to heaven, and like, and so it's created like a police state. Like, it's basically what it is.
Right.
And the story, like, another thing Philip K. Dick is notorious for is like throwing in the hallucinogenic, fucking crazy, made up drug, like totally,
of course,
mind fuck type of thing.
You gotta have those drugs just to make yourself have those really loopy moments.
Yeah. So
makes
this
for great visuals.
Yeah. So this was like he's like living in this relationship with this other famous person, and they're both sixes, which are these like genetically enhanced human beings. And anyways, he like there's this totally bizarre off the wall scene where like a former lover throws this creature at him with these feeding tubes that kind of like hits him in the chest, and he like gets a few tubes in him before he like pours a bottle of scotch on it to kill it.
Of course.
And then
Scotch kills everything.
so he wakes up in a motel after this all happens, because he gets rushed to the hospital, and it's like kind of like, oh shit, like you nearly died, and then he like falls asleep again, and then he's he's in this motel, and he's completely lost his identity, and he basically gets forced into buying a identity from like a back, like he basically has to get his papers forged and all this stuff, and there's police informants everywhere, and like they kind of like hinted at like there's like, so back in the day like all the university students were like fighting against Nixon, and so like then they turned them into like these penned in places where like the university students are like kept as like, you know, they're all like, yeah, they're all prisoners in these like the campuses, right? And then there's like a forced labor camps on top of that, and like all the police, like
Standard
yeah.
procedure. Cool.
And but Flow My Tears is apparently it's an old loot piece from Renaissance loot writer, and the policeman is like the nemesis of Jason. But he's like very much humanized. He's Buckman, and his sister, who he's like, so it's kind of like he's got this like, he's like this like general in the police force, and he has this dirty little secret, which is his wife is his sister, and they have a child together, and she's also a lesbian, and she's also fetishist, quote unquote fetishist, which means she's like big into S&M,
right?
And she's like, it's like all this like, and it was almost like, you know, like it was very much like, it felt like he was like talking about like the hypocrisy of like a lot of these people, like in like
get all the deviant behaviors and just cram it into one character.
Well, but I mean, just like the right wing, like, you know, like
yeah.
on the outside, like very much about law and order and all this stuff, but on the other, like living in this like everybody, all his superiors, like there's 6 people above him, and like everybody knows that he's got this completely, let's say, not very standard relationship with his sister and all this stuff. And it turns out that the whole reason that this guy, like, he loses his identity, nobody knows who he is, and he's like, what the hell is going on to me? It's because his sister had taken this drug which kind of like opens up all these different realities based on like, it basically, time is like, is perceived by the mind, and like in her mind, like it was like these like different realities like were managed to spin off, where she actually knew this guy because she had seen him on TV. And anyways, it's totally bonkers. She ends up like taking him to her house after he gets pulled in by the cops, after they finally figure out that he's actually had forged his papers and all this stuff. And she like takes all these like transmitters off him, and like a warhead that's been inserted under his skin, like all this like crazy, like, you know, tinfoil hat shit is actually reality.
It sounds, yeah.
And anyways, she ends up like dying, and he sees her as like a skeleton that's aged like some X number of years. It's very like dreamlike, a lot of it. But
it sounds very, yeah, like it's all a fever dream kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very much that. But like the story at the end is kind of like, the policeman is Buckman, who's like the guy, and he actually starts crying like several times over, and he's like in his mind, like he's like, he won't accept that it's actually a release of emotion, and it's like, you know, he's actually like, oh, that's something that just women do, like, you know, crying over like you can cry over somebody dead, and that's just like a thing you do. But like, you know, like he was basically crying for his humanity is what was implied. And anyways, so that was like kind of like the end, and then there was like a part 4, so like the novel split in 4 parts, and it was like kind of like, that was like just an epilogue, and it was like 4 pages essentially. Right. And like he's like, so it's kind of like you see like this little bit of redemption on the part of this guy, because he ends up like, take Jason Taverner, like he frames him for the murder of his sister, and like basically like the guy's gonna be killed. And
wait, so the guy who was 6 or whatever,
yeah, the 6, like
he
the main guy,
yeah,
the main guy, he like kind of like gets he kind of gets totally thrown under the bus by this cop in order to save his skin, because they all know his sister was
into some freaky deaky shit.
Yeah, and so like they were going to pray to like a suicide because of the fact that they had a kid together. Anyways, the whole thing is very,
so incest also a part of it.
Yeah, well,
of course,
yeah,
because I mean, what goes better with S&M than incest?
Yeah. So it was very much like, the reason why I kind of like brought it into the Windup Girl thing, because like there was like very much that same sort of police state mentality in that Thai city, and it was was like very much like people, like there was this the idea of the yellow cards in the Windup Girl, which were like these like they were basically refugees fleeing from like
Malaysia or Malaya or whatever.
They were Islamic fundamentalists in Malaysia.
Had taken over, like all the Chinese people that were living in Malaysia, and they were all like the upper class, I guess, of that area. they all had to flee. So it's
because they were getting murdered essentially.
they were most gruesomely so, with machetes and all, and just beheadings and all that craziness. But yeah, and it kind of that ties into very similar things happening in Bioshock, or in the City of Rapture as well, right? You had the lower class rising up as well, and overthrowing, or trying to overthrow, and just causes to everybody to butcher each other.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like one of the common threads of dystopian fictions, because like we got our society is generally viewed as like somewhat working because of the, you know, we've got like this like law and order, and like very much like something that's you know, we can depend upon like our systems or whatever, and then most of them, the systems break down, and then it turns into martial law, and it's very
you either go one extreme or the other, right? Everybody's just kind of free to do whatever they want, or you have and normally you have that whole martial law aspect where everybody is just government or whoever's in power has buckled down on everything, and they have you under their thumb.
That's like Fahrenheit 451, 1984, like all of the classic dystopian novels are like very much like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it is one of probably the most interesting aspects of the dystopian narrative, though, right? It's kind of what draws me back to it every time, even though it's every time you read a dystopian fiction story or you're in that world, it is depressing, and it's dirty, and it's dark, and there's some real horrible shit going on, but there's always that glimmer of hope. And I think that's what kind of brings me back to it every time, and what makes me enjoy those so much is that you still have that hope, even in this world where it's like, my God, I don't know if I'd last a day there. You still see those people that hang on to that hope, and just it really is what drives them forward, and it's admirable, and it's something that you can you really start to admire a lot of these characters, that they're able to survive in this world, because not a lot of people would.
1984 is not like that. I think the last line of the book was something like the face ground down with the boot heel for the
it's pretty bleak, but you know, I'm not saying all of them are like that. Obviously there's some that are incredibly depressing, but you know, you got to have those two, I guess, just to kind of balance it out.
I do like the ones where there are glimmers of hope, and I feel like most of pretty much all of the ones we've talked I haven't played the game, but all the ones that I know of that we talked about, there is hope.
No, for sure. I mean, you know, whether it's Windup Girl, Windup Girl has a lot of hope in it, and it was actually one of my favorite dystopian books that I've read in a long story. Like the storyline, the world itself was just awesome.
It was gripping too. Like his pacing was.
It was on point. I honestly read that book in a day and a half, like just nonstop. I didn't stop all day. It was something that you could continue to read constantly, and you were just enjoying it. Some of the chapters were incredibly short, but it worked. When they were short, it was for a point, and it was great. It was very brief. They didn't get into any long, whinging narratives, which was nice. You know, Bioshock, very similar to that. You know, it gives you that hope at the end, depending on what route you take. But they have those endings, right? And that follows through with like Bioshock 2 as well, and to another degree, Bioshock Infinite. Right? It's kind of a sad ending at the end of the original game, but when you get into the extra story that they tack on at the end, that kind of links Bioshock Infinite with the first two games, you get that glimmer of hope right at the end, which is really nice, and I thought it tied it together really nicely. But even in that world where everything has already gone to hell, and there are people murdering each other constantly, you can still find hope there. And it you know, it's nice to have that,
for sure.
Because I think as a whole, and as a theme for those types of books, when you focus too much on just the darkness and everything being awful, it can get to be very depressing. Like, I've read 1984 once. I have no interest in going back and reading it for a while. Right? Even though it was a very good book, and it was very well written, it's just, it is a very gloomy outlook to everything. Whereas this book, I could see myself reading it again. No
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah, it's very
Absolutely.
good. It's very good. And I mean, like, yeah.
And Bioshock, I've played multiple times. I still enjoy it.
Yeah.
I still, most of the time, end up choosing the nice route
Yeah.
because I just feel like I want to.
Yeah, now I hear you. And I mean, I would recommend Flow My Tears, the policeman said. It was it was nominated for the Hugo and Nebula. I know Windup Girl did win both of those, but this
Yes.
one won the John W. Campbell Award, whatever that one is. So.
John W. Campbell, he knows his books and he likes them,
Yeah.
and he chose that one to be really good. So
I'm not sure if that's the process, but
I think it is.
all right. Well, thanks for watching or listening, depending on what you guys did. But
Yeah, this has been the premiere episode, so I guess we'll continue next time. We'll have a different theme. We'll be into October, so I'm thinking spooky
horror.
stories.
Horror.
Yeah, we might have to do a couple for October, and just kind of get into the spooky, scary skeletons.
I'm right now reading The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which
Ooh,
is
nice.
Neil Gaiman's favorite horror story. I think Stephen King said it was his too.
Yeah,
so maybe
never
we'll
read
discuss
it,
that
but
one.
I've watched the movie
Okay.
with
Well,
Catherine Zeta-Jones, and it was terrible.
okay. I never.
But
don't know if
hey,
I've seen it.
That's it's an early, I think it was an early 2000s horror movie, so
Okay. Fair
very
enough.
schlocky.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, Owen Wilson's in it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he goes wow a few times.
Oh yeah,
It's real
that's
good.
classic.
Yeah,
All right. Well, we'll figure all that stuff out, and we'll have another one for you sometime in October.
absolutely. Until then, guys, take care.
See ya.